Welcome to the scenario management tutorial. The first part of the tutorial has to do with a revision of relative addressing, relative absolute referencing. And let's start by opening the document that contains the instructions and also opening the spreadsheet based on which we are going to actually build this tutorial. Now, here we have a global quality corporation that they have produced sales worth of $10,000 for year 2008, and their forecasting department predicts that these sales will be increased by 5% in year 2009, 6.20% based on the previous year's sales in year 2010. So basically every year there is a certain increase depicted by those cells here that is to be applied on the previous year's sales that we need to find here. So the first thing we need to do is find a formula here that will calculate the sales of year 2009 in such a way so that when we copy this formula to the right, it's going to also calculate the sales for the corresponding years we see here. So this formula will go as follows. This is last year's sales plus last year's sales times 5%, which is the increase that we see here. So converting this into an Excel formula, we start always with equal sign. So last year's sales plus last year's sales times 2009 increase gives us this formula. Now observe that I have not used any dollar signs because there is no need for absolute referencing here, since I want the columns to change so that it calculates for the next year sales and the previous year next year increase of sales and previous year's sales. And also there is no use of parentheses here since multiplication has a higher priority than addition. I press enter to get the results. I click on the cell that contains my formula now and drag it to the right, and there you are, have the results for the next cells. Now here we have three types of expenses for which there is a budget of 30%, 20% and 35% correspondingly, which is to be derived on the current year sales. So basically the cost of goods allocated budget would be 30% on 10,000 euros, which is the sales for 2008. Now we need to actually put a formula here that will not only calculate the cost of goods for 2008, will not only calculate the cost of goods for all those years, but it will be possible for the formula to be copied down, so it calculates the cost of goods, the general administrative expenses, and the marketing expenses for all the years, just relying on one formula. And that's basically because we want the spreadsheet to be generic, and this means that in actual business cases, what we have is we have more than three types of expenses. Obviously, I mean the slightest business has several hundreds even of different types of expenses, so that won't be just three expenses, but it will be a long list. So we don't really want to create formulas for each one of those expenses that are in reality. So let's learn how to do that now that we have three, so we can apply it with more in actual business cases. So the formula that finds the expenses for cost of goods will be equals and the current year sales times the budget that is allocated to the expenses. Now let's check this formula. In B10, let's see how the formula will behave if we copy it to the right. So B10 will change to C10, D10, so far and so forth. So we want this change to occur so that every cell will depict the budget that is allocated to cost of goods for the corresponding years. Now when we copy this formula down, B10 will change to B11, and as you can see, sales are always in the 10th row, so we don't want 10 changing to 11, 12. So we press F4 so many times until we see a dollar sign in front of 10, and well, actually we finished with this part of the formula. So let's go to the next address on the formula. B23 refers to this cell here, and when we copy this formula to the right, B23 will change to CDEF23, but we don't want this to happen because, as we can see, the expenses budget rates are always in B column, always in B column. So actually we press F4 until we see a dollar sign in front of B, and now we check the row part of the address, and when we copy this address, this formula down, B23 will change to B2425, which is something that we want because we want the formula to calculate G&A sales in the when we copy it down, and marketing sales when we copy it even further down. So our formula is probably ready right now. Let's copy and see. So we click on the fill handle, we drag it to the right, and now that all the range is selected, we click again on the fill handle and we drag it down, and we have all the results. Now the rest of the formula is quite simple. Total expenses is actually the sum of all the expenses, and actually we can do that by going back to the home menu, and at the home menu by finding the sum tool, okay, and you can click on the sum tool, and then Excel by default will find the range. Now be careful at this place. Although in our case the sum tool finds the correct range, it is quite common that the sum tool will not find the correct range. So before actually pressing enter, always check that the range that the sum tool have selected is the correct one. So let's press enter, and then we have the result. Drag it to the right, we have the appropriate results for the rest of the cells, and then at the net income we also apply the simple formula that has to do with sales minus total expenses to find out what the net income is. We click on the result and we drag it to the right, and our spreadsheet is ready. Now one last detail. Let's select all the range that contains amounts, money in other words, and observe that actually we have some amounts without decimal places, some amounts with one decimal place, and some with two, which gives us a small viewing problem in terms of that the decimal separator is not justified, and that might be confusing when viewing this spreadsheet, especially if you don't have a good vision. Also observe that there is no thousand separator, and it's a good idea that you have one, so that the amounts are far more readable, which is quite important in business, because reading mistakes might be extremely critical when making decisions in business. So having the range selected, the range, I repeat, that contains all the amounts, right mouse button click, format cells, choose number format, 2 decimal places, use thousand separator, and press OK, and now everything has become far clearer than what it was before. We can see that all the amounts are justified to the decimal separator, and everything is cool. Thank you for attending the first part. Look forward to see you in the second part of this tutorial.